Okay. Hello, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. So tonight we have a very interesting debate on our hands, where the topic is going to be which energy source is better and more efficient in general, nuclear or renewable. And with me tonight, I have the participants here. I've got my friend Kyle here, Christian Idealism. Say hi, Kyle.
Hello.
Okay, there's that. And I have my other friend here, the legend
Just
himself.
unexpected wonder. That's all they need to know.
Okay.
That's it. You
And
got
they
it.
both have their own respective YouTube channels. I suppose those will be linked in the description if you guys want to go check them out and see what these guys are all about. So this is how this debate is going to be structured. First, we're going to let Kyle and Daniel both give 10-minute opening statements, and then we'll go into the rebuttal periods. They're each going to have 3 7-minute rebuttals, and then after that we'll move into a 20-minute cross-examination, and then from there we can sort of just we can either go to closing statements or have maybe an open dialogue before then. It's up to you guys, but yeah. So, which one of you would like to go first?
Kyle, you can go first if you so desire.
Okie dokie.
Okay, so Kyle, the floor's yours, and I will. Well,
Alright.
I will start the stopwatch.
Your entire. Oh, I can't do screen share. That's not gonna be good.
Okay,
I can't do screen share.
can I start?
Oh wait, hold on. Okay. Can you guys see that?
Yeah, there you go.
Alright,
Okay, so I'm going to start your time now then.
Okay. So, why is nuclear energy better than renewable energy? Well, we need to go over what I'm actually going to be arguing here. So first, my arguments are based on existing technology and not anything that hasn't been invented yet. So any speculation about, what's going to be invented 100 years from now, that's not my focus here. My arguments are also based on current evidence that we have and not evidence that we don't have. So if my opponent claims that, oh, well, is it possible that nuclear energy is worse, could be worse in the future, I don't really care about that. I just care about what the evidence actually says. And I'm not going to be relying on baseless speculation about whether or not renewables or nuclear energy is bad or worse in the future. What I care about, again, is the actual evidence. So I'm not going to be arguing that renewables shouldn't have a part in replacing fossil fuels. I think that renewables should and do have an important part to play in actually replacing fossil fuels. However, I think more money and research needs to actually be going toward nuclear energy rather than renewables. And so let's go into that. So we need to consider the environmental cost. So it takes around 450 times more land for solar and wind than it does for nuclear. The solar farms require the destruction of ecosystems, whereas nuclear energy does not. Solar panels require 17 times more materials to make than nuclear power plants. So this also includes mining as well, because nuclear power plants do require mining, but the mining that's actually required for solar power plants is far greater than anything that nuclear plants require. So when solar panels, I also want to point out that when solar panels are used, they become waste. Like after 20 to 25 years, they become wasteful. And they can't be reused, and so this produces actually toxic chemicals. And unlike nuclear waste, these chemicals never decay, they can never be reused. It creates a lot of problems. Another issue is that wind actually kills a lot of endangered species. You have up to 40,000 to 328,000 birds killed each year from wind turbines, whereas for nuclear energy, you don't have these problems. And so nuclear energy, on the other hand, releases absolutely no CO2, and nuclear waste is properly contained and can be reused with no environmental impacts whatsoever. And I'm going to get more into the other issues in a moment. But so now we're going to get into the human deaths each year. So coal has around 10,000 deaths, oils 36,000, biomass 24,000, natural gas 4,000. But notice how nuclear is actually the safest form of energy. How it only kills about 90 people per petawatt an hour, which if you really think about it, like statistically, that's the safest form of energy that we have. And so I would actually say that nuclear is more safe than any renewable energy that we have. And so what about the reliability and efficiency of nuclear energy? Well, the fundamental problem with renewable energy is that it only works when the sun is out or when the wind is blowing, and this cannot be solved through any technology that we have. And so this is a really fundamental problem that makes renewable energy very unreliable. Whereas, on the other hand, nuclear energy is 100% reliable as it works 24/7, and it only has to shut down once every 2 years for refueling. And another thing I want to point out is that nuclear energy uses uranium for its energy, and so the reason this is preferred is due to it being easier to make nuclear weapons. However, thorium is much more efficient. In fact, if you were to do the actual numbers, 1 ton of thorium can produce as much power as 200 tons of uranium. And so with technology, and when we start using thorium instead of uranium, then this can actually dramatically increase its energy production. And so now, what are the actual main objections or the strongest objections to nuclear energy? Well, the first would be nuclear energy creates nuclear weapons. Well, the issue is research actually indicates the exact opposite, where more nuclear power plants we build, the less nuclear bombs are built, since the uranium element is used for power plants rather than nuclear bombs. And so that would address that argument. Then the second objection would be that you have this nuclear waste problem, which is, of course, terrible. Well, the issue, of course, is that nuclear waste, or plutonium for that matter, can be reused or stored in a safe environment, unlike other forms of energy where waste goes into the air. And like I said before, solar energy has this problem of not being able to be reused. And so the final objection is that there have been nuclear accidents and meltdowns. And so out of all the objections to nuclear energy, this is perhaps the best objection, would be that there's been a lot of nuclear accidents in the past, and therefore we shouldn't use nuclear because you're going to have these meltdowns. Well, nuclear accidents are, first of all, they're very rare, and there is a model that scientists have been trying to make, which is called the liquid fluoride thorium reactor, and it has a unique design that makes meltdown pretty much impossible. And so what this would mean is, like, all public concerns for nuclear energy are addressed when we actually take this into consideration. And so I think, given all this evidence, nuclear energy is the safest energy source for both humans and for the environment. With the introduction of thorium, we can produce a lot more electricity for nuclear power plants, and it runs 24/7, unlike renewables, which are contingent upon the weather. So unlike solar and wind, there is no environmental cost for nuclear energy. Yes, there have been meltdowns, but with models like the liquid fluoride thorium reactor, we can make nuclear reactors completely meltdown proof. And finally, building more nuclear reactors will decrease the creation of nuclear weapons, and nuclear waste can be reused or stored properly in a contained environment away from the ecosystems. And so once again, this supports the view, or my kind of the statistical fact, that nuclear energy is both the safest form of energy that we have, it's the most efficient, and with new models like the liquid fluoride thorium reactor, it can be meltdown proof. And so that would get rid of all of the concerns for nuclear power plants. And that will be my time.
Okay. Thank you, Kyle, for your presentation. Unexpected Wonder, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I will say Kyle presented a very great opening lecture. I actually learned a few things from what he had to say. Now, the question we have before us, ladies and gentlemen, is supposedly nuclear power versus renewable power. Now, I say supposedly because what my opponent tonight is speaking about is nuclear fission. Now, I will get back to why that distinction is important later on down the line. But understand that it is a very specific subset of all of nuclear power. In fact, certain nuclear power are renewable energies. Now, renewable energies. Now, there is a common political policy when we talk about renewable energy at this specific time. Is and I understand what my opponent is talking about with the piss poor, underutilized, very elementary perspective on what's been going on out here with the overly gaudy wind turbines, with these piss poor, just underutilized technology when it comes to solar panels. They're just very inefficient, very, very ineffective, and I don't blame anybody for not wanting to use them. Currently, as stands, because of governmental monopolies and otherwise, renewable technology, actual green tech, has been so stalled and stagnated that it makes no real lucrative or reasonable, rational reason to go towards that path. Currently, nuclear fusion and power plants are the big players because they've been made the best technology presented towards us. But does that mean that they're the best technology available and even in the foreseeable future? Because my opponent also presented upgrades on the current technology, which I very much appreciate. I am not opposed to nuclear fission. I just think that it's not the only option that we should pursue, or even the best option to pursue. Not only for maybe on a larger scale, it's the best option that we presently have, but on a more localized scale, it is not the best option. Number one, when it comes to nuclear fission and power plants, they are a naturalized monopoly. You can't just have power plants all over the place. It's just impossible. Some would argue that you don't need them. But still, here's the fact of you could easily have, from an economic policy, monopolization by plutocrats and technocrats. That's number one. Number two, you have the potential of what happens, like in certain places where there have been freeze-overs of nuclear power plants and have had to be abandoned. So you have a potential ecological hazard far greater than any other energy source that we currently have and currently possibly can have in the future. Renewable energy, what are we talking about? We're talking about nearly infinite resources. Not infinite, but nearly infinite. We know that nuclear fission is a very finite resource. And we know that we have to keep mining, as was presented, these very volatile elements, very heavy metals, and that lead to radioactive waste. You have solar power. You have wind power. You have things such as magnetism. You have tidal waves, tidal energy that can be tapped into. You have biodegradable, biochemical waste, that you can burn. You have geothermal energies from the ground themselves that can be utilized. The power of volcanoes can be utilized. Eventually, you can have things like plasma. Okay, you have super cold, you have super heat. We have neon lights, ladies and gentlemen. We can't develop plasma technology. You have, and potentially, and what I promote is for nuclear fusion. And for those who don't know what nuclear fusion is, it is the power of stars. Instead of bombarding one atom into another and causing nuclear fission, which you see in power plants, nuclear fusion combines the power of two hydrogen atoms, and it releases such an immense amount of power that you cannot weaponize, which you can with nuclear fission. Not only that, it creates so much power that you don't need in a very small container and across the globe. So it solves your energy problem right there. You also have hydrogen power that can be tapped into. Now, this was gone away because of the volatility and the misunderstanding of the 1930s, where they were dumb enough to put it in weather balloons. But you have hydrogen power. You have steam power. There are 8 to 10 energy resources that can easily be tapped to that are way safer, way more productive on a localized level, way more equalized than what you have with nuclear fission. So what I'm presenting is alongside, if you still design nuclear fission for a large scale nation, for a localized consumer, all of these produce more efficient, cheaper, and less impact on the environment. That'll be my time for the opening segment.
Okay. Thank you, Unexpected, for your presentation. And now we will move into the rebuttal period. Kyle, you have the floor. 7 minutes.
Okay, so first of all, you made a few claims. So you agreed with me that, and again, we'll do this in the Q&A session, but you made a few claims like naturalized monopoly. So you said how there's this monopoly, and that's why I made the point that that's why I said what's better for our what's better, either it's renewables or it's nuclear, and I made the point that it's nuclear. And I understand that, yeah, there can be a monopoly, but I mean, there's a monopoly right now with the renewables, and so I'm not really sure. Just because there's a monopoly, I'm not really sure how that defeats my argument, or not my argument, but I'm not sure how that would make a good objection to the use of nuclear fission. And then you also mentioned, now again, I do admit that the meltdown problem is perhaps the biggest reason why nuclear energy is looked down upon, is because it's had a lot of these catastrophic events happen in the past. But again, there are new models out there that are meltdown proof, and so I think that would address that objection. Then you mentioned how renewables can give you infinite energy, whereas nuclear is finite. Well, again, we need to look at the environmental impacts here. If you're going to say that it's renewable, it's infinite, well, technically it's not, especially when you look at solar panels. Like, solar panels only last for like 20 to 25 years, and once they're used up, they're used up. So that's I think that's a problem. And then same thing with wind turbines. I mean, it's not the same criticism, but you still have this issue of using up too much land and it not being sufficient. And so you have that. And then, yes, I would agree that nuclear fission is finite, but I'm sure, as you said in your opening statement, that since nuclear fusion is going to hopefully get here within the next 50 years or so, then that'll kind of solve that issue, and I would totally agree with that. And so I would say that nuclear fission is something we should go towards because it's the best, environmentally speaking, right now. And then hopefully once nuclear fusion comes along in the far future, then we can use that as the alternative. And so, yes, I would agree that nuclear fission, you also mentioned that nuclear fission isn't the only option. I would totally agree with that. That's why in my opening statement I never denied that. But again, the issue my main problem is, especially with politicians, is they spend all this time with renewables and they seem like it's such this great thing, and it's really not. When you look at the actual numbers, like, renewables are not that great. And so I think once we actually look at the statistics and we look at the arguments and the scientific advancements, I think nuclear, again, would be far better than anything that renewables have to offer. And so that will be my rebuttal to that.
Okay. Unexpected, you're up.
I will admit you did a damn good job on that one. The thing, ladies and gentlemen, we have to consider, okay, is a number of things. And I do not blame my opponent tonight for the positions he would make. If he was presenting before Capitol Hill in Congress, if he was presenting before the British Parliament, he would have phenomenal points. The problem I take is similar to his, but I decide to go down a different path. My problem is with the politicians, is with the current corporations, as to where they are force feeding us these ideas of what renewable energy is. They're force feeding us to what seems to be the best option. And what do I mean? I'll use, for example, the tech industry. We know that technologies are always anywhere from 15 years to 35 years behind what is actually possible with our legitimate tech. We've known this because of military usage and otherwise. Now, what does that mean for energy? Now, you could say, well, when we want the best. No. When you have corporations and lobbyists and people in positions of power who want profits over the benefits of the regular mankind, as we know that to be the truth, then what you get is inefficient, piss poor, second rate, third rate models of things that should never be. When I look at a solar panel, is that what I look when I see solar technology? Hell no. Why are we not taking tips from nature and from trees and things of that nature? Actual solar power things. How about we have, I don't know, things like actual greenhouses? And I don't mean where you plant and cultivate things, but how about, I don't know, plants growing and gathering energy and actually utilizing our environment? I mentioned about geothermal energy. Iceland utilizes that. We have places around the world that have geothermal energy ready to be tapped, just like natural gas. Natural gas has revolutionized modern industry. You hear almost nothing about natural gas, even though it's a fossil fuel. The point is that the information being presented pushes forth, let's go nuclear, because that is the perception that is being placed upon. These wind turbines are big for no reason, and they're inefficient. I would agree with my opponent because we don't have the proper technology. We spend millions and billions of dollars annually on weapons and weapons of war, all these machines of war, but we spend almost nothing on technological advancements for energy production and efficiency. And so, of course, renewable energy seems like a complete joke, but because we don't have the actual technology, which is available to us and has been available to us since the Clinton era. That'll be my time for the first rebuttal.
Okay, moving on to second rebuttals. Kyle, you have the floor. 7 minutes.
Oh, you didn't tell me about the second rebuttals, but yeah, I would agree that I think I would agree again. I think one thing we could agree on is this monopoly or this idea that I don't think it is. There's a lot of problems, and I don't admit that there are also problems with nuclear. But again, we have to weigh the benefits and the costs. So with renewables, I mean, it's pretty obvious to me that renewables, the costs are really bad compared to the benefit. I mean, yeah, there are some benefits to it, but it's just comparing it, like, it's not that good. And then we have nuclear, which it doesn't produce any CO2. It doesn't have these problems. I mean, yeah, it has the meltdown problem, but that can be solved with newer technology, and it produces a lot more energy. So again, it would kind of support my original point. And then you also mentioned about, I think at the very end you said how, because I didn't write any of this down, by the way, but so you mentioned about how, why is it that we know that if we know that renewables are bad or inefficient, why do we keep on using it? And again, I agree. Yes, it is because of this monopoly on truth, but that doesn't. I wouldn't really. Again, all I'm trying to argue here is what is the actual, like, point? Like, what's the actual benefit? And it seems like the evidence prefers that nuclear is at least better than these renewable energy sources. And not to say that, there won't be better technology in renewable energy, but as far as we know, that's why I argued that as far as we know and as far as we understand it, it seems like nuclear is far better. And like, for example, let me take the example of Germany. So Germany has spent like billions of dollars on this renewable energy. If they spent that $1 billion not on renewables, but if they spent it on nuclear energy, they would probably have 100% nuclear by now. But because they decided to go full renewable, then their electricity is pretty inefficient, and they're basically wasting all this money on something that just doesn't work, and it's going to probably create a lot of problems, especially with the whole solar panel issue with them dying off and not being able to be reused, and so then you're left with a bunch of solar panel waste that's going to be thrown into the ocean or something like that. So it's a big problem, and I think that we could avoid those problems if we didn't solely rely on renewables, but rather would more rely on more efficient energies like nuclear. And so that would be my time.
Okay.
By the way, Eric, what we're going to do, I didn't know about the
Moving on
second
to
rebuttal. Yeah, cross-examination, because I didn't know there was going to be a second rebuttal. But
what did you say?
You didn't tell me that there's going to be a second rebuttal. You told me there's.
He's saying he didn't know about the second one.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. There's. So it's up to you guys if you want to do a third.
I mean, you can do
set of rebuttals, and then we can.
No, I want to do cross-examination. I mean, that's kind of
What'd you say?
That cross-examination, because that's what we were going to do right after rebuttals, and after he gave, I was about ready to get out my questions, and so.
Okay. Do you guys want to move on then to the cross-examination? Okay. Well, we'll do that then. So we'll move on to the cross-examination period.
Well, I don't have a second rebuttal.
Oh no, you can. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, what?
Have your second rebuttal.
I don't have a second rebuttal.
No, it's fine. Give him a second rebuttal, and then
Okay.
cross-examination.
That's all good. I
didn't know.
I like to address
I should have said something before, but it's fine. Don't worry about it.
Other points.
All right, go ahead.
Okay.
No, it's all good. I thought he told you. Yeah, talk with me beforehand. So it's all good.
Oh,
it's
my bad, Wonder. The floor is yours.
All right, it's no problem. There are just a few points I would want to make, and the reason as to why I was so big about policy is because number one, the door had got opened by my opponent, and also I look at the technology because, unfortunately, ladies and gentlemen, instead of for economics and sciences to be independent, to be able to progress humanity as they should, instead of the same thing with the social sciences in every field that we do, we have governmental agencies and people who have vested interests in fossil fuels and such. And I'm also looking towards why we don't actually have renewable energy. I don't consider any of that the symptoms that we see today of the problems that Mr. Kyle was presenting tonight was because we don't actually have renewable energy. Now, some can say, well, aren't you just getting away from the topic? No, I'm presenting that we do not actually have what is called renewable energy. When you have these power cells, as he's calling them solar panels, all they are these little power cell batteries that are large things like we have with Duracell batteries. They're no different, really. When you have these wind turbines that are just big and showy, but are inefficient as can be, of course, when those are your examples of what supposed green technology is, of course it's piss poor. But again, it's about control of the people and control of the economy. Because those at the top know that if the people have actual renewable power, then they don't pay these high-ass electrical bills. They don't pay these high-ass water bills. They don't pay these high-ass gas bills. Those are just the facts of the matter. And so what we have here is still a continuation of 19th century and 20th century thought. I'm proposing 21st century thought. Now, I'm not going to bother y'all at this time with a need of a third industrial revolution, but this goes into that. What we see now is a sham. It is not renewable energy. What we see now is a sham that shows an edifice as to why we need monopolized power units, such as massive power plants. What we see now is to say, you can have if you can pay for it, and you can't have because you don't fit into what we do. It's a matter of control. It's a matter of stagnating technological growth. Most of the things I propose don't have the technologies on the market to be able to refute to say that they don't work because they're not being allowed to be on the market for them to work. Think of not only just power plants of the natural monopoly known as nuclear fission, think of the monopolization of the electric companies, of the water companies. These are all being monopolized, and we're all okay with them because this is the best we have. That's the law that's being presented to us, ladies and gentlemen. And so my opponent's position, I don't blame him for having the position. The facts, the statistics speak for to what he points to, but the facts also speak towards a sinister conspiratorial corruption towards pushing and propagating this so-called green technology is a straw man, a real-life concrete example of a facade. It's an eminence front that is being pushed for us, and I will continue to argue that. We don't have renewable energy, ladies and gentlemen. We don't have the tech for it because the powers that be want us to have nuclear fission, so that they can control us, so they can control our electricity and our water. That is my time.
Okay. Thank you for that, Wonder. So now we will be moving into the cross-examination period. You guys will have 20 minutes to go back and forth and engage one another freely. So, yeah, go at it, guys. The floor is yours.
All right, you want to start or want me to start the questions?
It's up to you. If you have any questions, I will gladly answer.
So let me just ask you this. So I know you take the position that renewables are better than nuclear fusion. So how would you explain that nuclear is bad for the environment when nuclear fission is bad for the environment when wind turbines and solar energy destroy ecosystems?
All right, I'll very much answer that. Thank you for that good and very applicable question. Number one, we do have nuclear waste. You cannot get around that very fact, and there's nothing you can really do with nuclear waste. Now, I have clearly, just in my last rebuttal, clearly stated that what is called solar panels and what are called wind turbines are complete shams. They're complete jokes. They are inefficient. They are wasteful. And they're not good towards production in any regard. So to make an attack on renewable energy because of these shams is reduction in any regard. So to make an attack on renewable energy because of these shams is lunacy. I mentioned before you have things like geothermal energy. I mentioned before you have biocompostable energy. You have hydrogen. You have steam. You have a number of better magnetics. You have a number of better renewable energy sources presently. Forgetting the things like plasma and nuclear fusion, which are down the pipe within the next century. You have 5 or 6 variables that are used, but you can't really capitalize on them. So thus, the industries aren't being pushed for them because we know that profit over people is the name of the game for the past 200 years. So that would be my answer to them. They're complete jokes that is being presented to us. Now, I do have a question for you, though.
Okay, go ahead.
How do you get beyond the power plant for nuclear fission? Do you localize it and make it effective more efficiently?
What do you mean localized? Like, you mean like a nuclear power plant for each city, or because I wouldn't see why you couldn't localize that.
No, I'm saying how do you go beyond the nuclear power plant? How do you make nuclear power more like, let's say, your local electrical thing? Because wouldn't you agree that the current electric grid needs to be done away with and we need a better system?
Well, I mean, what do you think it gets? I mean, it gets a lot of its electricity from these nuclear power plants, so I'm not sure why that couldn't be localized.
Mm-hmm.
Are you saying that it produces too much electricity, or because it produces a lot of electricity? It's not like wind turbines that require a lot of this land, but it doesn't require really that much land at all. So what's your concern with? Because I would say like a lot of the nuclear power plants.
What I'm saying is,
yeah, go ahead.
I'm not arguing. Number one for those who are not understanding my position. When I keep saying localized, what do I mean? I mean within homes and I mean within communities. I mean, in case there was, God forbid, a natural disaster or a post-apocalyptic situation, say a war, which let's be honest about the world we live in. If let's say we're starting over from ground zero, right? You can effectively have a land with a nuclear power plant. People are assuming that things will continue on the way that they are, and that is a dangerous game that humanity should never play.
Well, isn't that?
I'm proposing self-efficiency for people, ability for the peoples in their communities.
I know, but isn't that just speculation? Like, just because there's...
Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, to answer your... I think that's just... I'm not saying it won't happen, but, again, that's just speculation. I mean, just because if there is, like, this apocalypse where, you know, we couldn't use nuclear power plants, I mean, fine. Then you find something else to use. That's not the discussion. The discussion is, like, what's most efficient for everyone as a whole, and I would say nuclear power plants is more sufficient than renewables, and so that's how I would answer that question. Is I think your question just kind of is too speculative, and I mean I would agree. Yes, I think eventually we need to get more localized, and people need to be more self-sufficient. But for now, I think power plants is the way to go because it produces the most electricity without harming the environment. So yeah. Are you ready for...
But hold on now. Now, yeah. If you have another question, absolutely.
Oh, you want to do my next question, or?
Sure, you can do, or I can speak. It's up to you.
Okay. Okay. So my next question is: do you think that models like the liquid fluoride thorium reactor can address the meltdown problem?
The meltdown problem.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, sure. Here's the issue I have. You're always going to be presented with that problem. You're always going to be presented with that problem.
I can tell you how
when I look at nuclear, this discussion on.
Because you would agree with me that that's probably the biggest problem for nuclear is this meltdown problem, and what I'm saying is there's
my biggest issue is the fact that it's not you can't have localized energy with power plants. You just can't.
You could to a certain degree, but not.
And that's to me that's a big problem moving forward.
I would have to think about that more, but I wouldn't see why. Hey, can you hear me? Sorry. But
I can hear you.
Okay, but what I'm saying is, that was my question: is do you think it could solve the meltdown problem? Because yes, one of the biggest objections to nuclear energy is this meltdown problem, and there's actually models that can actually avoid this problem in the first place. So would you agree that could solve that issue, is my question.
You can't. I understand the question, and it's yes and no. Meaning, yes, you can quote unquote solve it, meaning less the amount of possible, but you're not going to get away from the very issue because of the volatile nature of nuclear fission itself. You can't get away from it. You can lessen it as amount as possible. That's like saying, can you get away from cars overheating, engines overheating? You can do your best to lubricate them. You can do your best to keep them cool down. You can do all of this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, friction and heat and movement of molecules causes heat. And if things go sideways and wrong, you can have a nuclear meltdown. There's no two ways around it. That's just the nature of physics.
Well, I know, but I can...
So you're talking about being theoretical. I'm dealing in the real.
No, but this is a real model. This is a model that's been proposed to solve the meltdown problem, because what it does is
I understand it's a real model, but I'm also talking about real physics.
I know, but what I'm saying is those real physics can be accounted for when we consider how this is actually built. So that's all I'm saying. Do you think that?
Understood.
I mean,
and
yeah.
you,
I mean,
and
yes,
you
you're right.
still deal with
Technically,
the
yes.
problem at the end of the day.
Even with this model, yes, it's possible that there could still be a meltdown, but the chances are so low that it's far better to make, because the risk is so low that it's way better to actually just have a power plant rather than having to worry about whether or not it's going to melt. So yes, you're right. It's possible it could still melt down.
I'm not worried about melting. See here. Okay, if we're worried on the fear factor, if you're concerned about anything going wrong, never step foot in a car, never step foot in a plane, never use any piece of technology. That is weak.
I know, that's my point.
I'm simply answering the question.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm simply answering the question that the possibility always exists. You can't get around it. Anybody try to dress it up like some turkey on Thanksgiving, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Now the question I have to propose to you, okay, is based on historical precedent. I don't know who here knows about John D. Rockefeller and how he revolutionized the oil industry, first with kerosene, then with gasoline. Do you know about that?
No, I know. I mean, I don't get into the whole conspiracy theory stuff, but
okay.
Whatever.
Now you do know, but I'm talking about historical fact right now. That's all I'm getting on. Now we know that before that, oil was being completely wasted and burned off. Okay, for kerosene, and then he recognized that you could refine it and use it, and then we got gasoline, which led to the internal combustion engine, which revolutionized modern transit. Facts, all just pure facts. The question that I propose is this not the same arguments you're using, the exact same ones back in the 1870s, and I could say the exact same ones in the early 1970s when it came to computers and eventually the internet, is that, well, right now, the technology we have today is better than what you're proposing, so we shouldn't shoot for it. How is what you're proposing now any different from what we saw for the past 2 centuries?
I don't see why. All I'm arguing is that nuclear power is better than renewable. That's all I'm claiming. I mean, yeah, technology is always going to improve, but that's not the point of this debate. The debate was whether or not nuclear energy was better than renewables, and I think it is. So, yeah.
But this is the point of the debate, because you're saying that one energy source based on technology is better than another one, and one of the predominant arguments that you yourself have made in all 3 segments that you spoke on was that because of piss poor models being these solar panels and piss poor models being these trash ass wind turbines, that is why renewable energy is worse than nuclear. But then on the same extent, you propose a better model that supposedly addresses, a theoretical model that supposedly addresses the flaws of nuclear reactors. So on the one hand, you seem to be arguing out of both sides of your mouth.
It's not a theoretical model, though. It's actually been made. That's why I mentioned it, because it's not just theoretical. They actually built it. It just got shut down because. Okay, you want to go a little history here? Okay, so one of the nuclear power plants actually used thorium instead of uranium, and what happened was the main reason why all the nuclear power plants in the world use uranium instead of thorium is that uranium, it's easier to make nuclear weapons with uranium, and it's much more difficult to make nuclear weapons with thorium, despite the fact that thorium is much better as an energy source than uranium. In fact, if you were to do the numbers, it would be like 1 ton of thorium could produce as much energy as 200 tons of uranium. And then they have a model that could address, again, the meltdown problem, and you wouldn't be able to make nuclear weapons, or it wouldn't be as easy to make nuclear weapons with thorium. And so, it's a new model. It hasn't been used that much, but that's because of, unfortunately, historical inaccuracies with regards to nuclear weapons. But yeah. I forgot what your question was, but I think I.
So from what I'm gathering, what I'm gathering from what you're saying is that nuclear fission is dealing with the exact same problems, in which I would agree with that. It's dealing with the exact same problems as what renewable energy is, and that they're being hogtied for better energy sources. And so, if both systems are literally being handicapped for economic gain and political power, then that would mean that to make that argument that renewable energy is hindered because of technological, which is what I'm arguing, is being hindered because of lack of technological progress. And that nuclear power is being pushed for. That's exactly what I was arguing earlier. And you just verified what I was arguing.
No, but I mentioned thorium in my presentation. I just gave you the reason why uranium is preferred over thorium. It's because it's easier to make nuclear weapons with uranium. So that's why it's historically been preferred over thorium. But there are countries like India, for example, they use thorium. They're starting to use thorium as their nuclear power source. And so there are countries that are using thorium to make electricity. And so I think that's a good thing. Because here's the thing, I'm not arguing that uranium-based nuclear power plants are the best. I actually would say that thorium-based nuclear power plants are the best because they don't have the same issues and they can produce a lot more electricity than uranium. And there's a lot more of thorium on this planet than there is uranium. So that's another thing. But yeah, it doesn't at all take down my original argument.
And I mean, we're at an impasse because we're the exact same point. I have 6 or 7 different forms of energy that are better than even wind and solar. But those forms of energy, it's interesting that you bring up India. India is vital to this whole discussion because you have a developing nation becoming a first world nation, okay? And they're doing what they have to and they have a lot of problems that they have to overcome, but they're doing what they have to. They're using, as you say, the more efficient form of energy, correct? Is that what I'm understanding?
They're using thorium
is more
instead of
efficient than uranium?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And what I'm arguing is similar, just from a different vein. Because I understand exactly where you're coming from, nuclear fission. I'm not opposed to it. I'm saying that to make the claim that renewable overall is worse, is to me it's just like saying, okay, well, biplanes. We should use cars rather than biplanes. Well, cars are better forms of travel for a plethora of reasons than biplanes. Because we don't have at this time, I would argue, the jets, the helicopters, the 747s, the 757s, you name it. That's what we have in the renewable game. Things like magnetism aren't being tapped into. I know Eric, he's a moderator, he brings up things like what Tesla was proposing. There are things that I don't even know of in the renewable game, but there's biodegradable energies that are not being tapped into. The United States does so much waste, but there's so much recyclable material just laying on streets that can be utilized. There's geothermal energies that can be utilized. There's tidal. Seaports should be using tidal machines, but you don't see any tidal machines because we want our pretty beaches and because that would lessen the blow of course in places like New York and places like LA. There are a plethora of energy sources that would actually, in conjunction with one another, not saying it gets away from the overall impact of the nuclear, but it does it in a cleaner way. It utilizes the already enormous, I didn't say infinite, but nearly infinite sources of energy that we already have. Hydrogen power. We have water, H2O. We have an abundance of it. utilizing hydrogen power. And there ain't that much. There's not really that much waste. There is so much we can be doing that we are not currently doing. Steam power, not really using it. Haven't used it since the late 19th century. That's renewable energy.
All right. Ask my third question. Or do you want to? How long do we have, Eric? Eric, how much time do we got left?
Sorry. You guys just hit 20 minutes, but
okay, that's fine.
We can keep going for another 10 or so.
I don't know. You want to keep going, or you just want to close it out with closing statements? Pratt, you want to keep...
I want to hear what kind of question you got.
Okay, so my
this can be the final question. It's fine.
Okay, this is my last. I had a fourth question going, but it's fine. Because I think you would. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of combine this. So, just a simple question: would you rather pay more for electricity because it's renewables, or would you pay less for electricity because it's nuclear? I'm sure you would agree that you would rather pay less, right? Just simple answer, yes or no.
Simple answer, yeah, sure.
Okay, so you pay. Okay, that's fine. All right, that's kind of irrelevant anyway.
Yeah, sure.
But okay, so my final real question is this. So, why do you think that an energy source that is dependent on the weather is better than a source that runs 24/7 regardless of the weather?
Here's number one. Let's get away from some myths. Number one, renewable energy, which multiple forms of which I presented tonight, are not dependent on the weather. Again, hydrogen power is not dependent on the weather. Steam is not dependent on the weather. Magnetism is not dependent on the weather. Nuclear fusion is not dependent on the weather. Biochemical is not dependent on the weather. Geothermal is not dependent on the weather. That's 5 or 6 sources right there that are not dependent on the weather. Number two, if you had efficient wind usage, if you had efficient solar power usage, number one, there are places, I'm from places where it's sun most of the day. If you efficiently use that, you have asphalt, which holds on to heat energy, thermal energy, through the night. You can feel it coming up during the middle of the night. If asphalt can do that, there are way better conductors that can utilize these forms of energy that we already know of. They're already in existence. The technology exists. So whether you have quote-unquote weather-dependent materials or not, I mentioned tidal power. We know that tides come in. We can predict the tides. We have the technology to utilize it. We're not using efficient technology, and that's the problem. We're using wasteful technologies. So I'm opposed to the waste. I'm for the efficiency. That's my argument, is for efficient. And when you have efficient, you have cheap, you have localized, you have widespread. Just like what happened to the Model T under Henry Ford. He made it cheap and efficient. You can do the exact same thing with energy, which you cannot do with nuclear fission because you're stuck at the same exact pace the whole time because it's singular entities in various places. You can't cheapen the cost. It will only cap out.
All right. You want to ask me one final question? Or you want to do closing statements? Because I think...
No, I ain't really got them.
Okay.
You can do closing statements.
All right. All right, we're going to do closing statements now. So who wants to go first?
So do you guys want to move on to closing statements? Or?
You know what? Since I did my opening statement first, I'll let Pratt... What's your name? Sorry. It was Daniel. I'll let Daniel go his opening statement first.
You up.
Right, go ahead.
My closing statement?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm
expected you can give your closing statements.
All right. This has been a very good discussion, debate, very healthy debate we've had tonight. I thank the moderator. I thank my opponent tonight for stepping into the lines and into the fire. for a very important conversation that should be happening at things like G20 summits. It should be happening um, amongst corporations, but it isn't because you have companies out here that would rather push fossil fuels and push their profit margins and stuff than would rather the ecological and economic impact that they're leaving for the future generations to come. Renewable energy is the energy of the future. If you're making arguments that is nuclear fission, are nuclear reactors, are power plants, whatever you want to go by, are they the powers of the present? Absolutely. My opponent presented multiple reasons as to why this is the case. I make the argument for the future. Now, I was accused of using a theoretical situation that's very, very real, that's very, very historically validated, if you will, of a war-torn, post-apocalyptic, or a natural disaster coming and affecting a nation, community, society. Very simple. If a flood happens, you could easily have a city cut off from power sources. I'm saying you need better technology that utilizes already present technologies, advanced technologies, nearly infinite power sources in a localized area so that in the event and when it does occur, because I'm from an area originally where hurricanes came and I saw what happened to the people that had electricity going for weeks on end in some cases. You do your best to prevent rather than rely on somebody else in some foreign place. And it comes down to that: do you want to be subservient to powers that be, or do you want self-sufficiency where you and yours can do your best to live beneficially at a cheaper, more affordable way, where you don't have to be concerned where your energy is coming from in a clean, more efficient manner? That's my time.
Okay. Thanks, Wonder. Kyle, your closing statements, please.
All right, so I opened up with I argued in my opening statement that my arguments are based again on existing technology, has nothing to do with what's going to happen in the future or anything like that, or anything that hasn't been invented yet. My arguments are based again on current research and current evidence that we have, not evidence that we don't have. And so I didn't rely on basic speculation throughout this debate. I just focused on what do we know today about nuclear energy versus renewables, and I gave those facts and I laid them out. And again, I'm not arguing that renewables shouldn't have a part in replacing fossil fuels. I think renewables are very important. However, I think that more money in research should be going toward this nuclear energy rather than all the money going towards renewables. And so that was kind of what I was arguing for in my presentation. And so I just want to open up a few facts. So I would agree with my opponent that there is this monopoly going on, and that I think that Congress and I think our country, and as far as I can see, the whole world needs to take into account the benefits of both renewables and nuclear energy. I think that they both need to be improved. I just think that too many people have seen nuclear energy as like this horrible demonic thing, and I don't think that's justified at all. And I would agree with my opponent that eventually, in the far future, again, this is kind of going into speculation a little bit, we do need to figure out a way where people can actually be self-sufficient. And so I would actually totally agree with my opponent with there. And I would actually say that I think that nuclear fusion itself could actually eventually be self-sufficient, at least localized speaking. Because again, we don't know about these nuclear fusion. And same thing with renewables, I guess you can say. We don't really know about future technology. So I would just say that hopefully they can both be used as reliable energy sources. And I know that renewables is argued to be infinite, but again, that's not necessarily the case for all renewables. And I mean, with nuclear fusion, I guess you could argue that it is infinite in some way. But again, nuclear fusion hasn't really been in practice yet, so that's why I'm not going to really rely on nuclear fusion, but rather nuclear fission, which we do know about and we do use for power and electricity. And so I think I would just argue again, based on our current knowledge of what we know today, nuclear fusion is far better to both the economy, to nature, and to efficiency than our current renewable energy. Not to say that renewable energy can't improve, but the issue is that, again, it seems like nuclear fusion, or nuclear fission for that matter, is way more safer for human beings and for the environment. And I think with better models, we could actually avoid a lot of the concerns that people have about it. And so I think if people are going to make a decision, I think they should base of who won tonight's debate. I think they should base it on what do we actually know, rather than what we don't. I think what we do know is that renewable energy is not really sufficient. It can be improved, but it's sufficient. And I think that nuclear fission and fusion, when it comes out, can be more sufficient for us. And so that will be my closing statement.
Okay. Well, first and foremost, thank you, gentlemen, for taking the time of your days to discuss this very important and pressing matter, and for presenting your unique perspectives on it. Would you guys like to do some shameless plugs here and advertise for your YouTube channels? Or
I'm not shameless in mine.
Everyone knows who I am already. I don't need to
Go
explain
ahead.
it. Just something different I'm going to do for my channel. So.
Unexpected, wonder.